you are a B2B service-based business owner and you are looking to gain more clients, create more impact and more revenue in your business, tune in to Amplify Your Marketing Message with Campbell Rapin. Every week, we're going to take you through how to build an audience of buyers, mastering your marketing message, and making offers. Welcome back, everybody. I will tell you that next level growth requires sometimes a big shift in your next level identity. And a good friend of mine introduced me to our next guest who has witnessed this, supported this, led this, and has something really important to say about this. So please give a very warm welcome to Cassie Shea, who is going to be our guest today. Cassie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Christine. Glad to be here.
It is a pleasure. So let's talk about this idea that as you move into more wealth, as you move into more success, as you move into more impact, sometimes how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you comes out of sync. How do we tackle this and how do we bridge that so that it becomes fast level growth?
Yeah, I love that you use the word bridge. That's actually exactly where I would go with this. So I'll give you a super recent example. I had a call just to date with a very successful entrepreneur. He's running a multi-six-figure business, about to cross into the seven-figure mark. And his stated problem was, I don't know how to delegate sales and marketing. I'm sure many people in your world are thinking about this. As we grow in our business, we want to learn how to bring others into the team, right? Sure. And the first thing he said was, I'm a hard worker. And I asked for his permission to coach a little deeper. Can I open up this question? But that idea, that identity of being a hard worker is actually what's preventing you from bridging where you are now to where you want to go. Because the story we tell ourselves about what's possible is dictating what decisions we make. At the core of it, that's identity work. So whatever story we're telling ourselves about where we are in our business today and how that's different from where we want to go, that creates what's called a gap. Mm-hmm. And the fastest way to do that is actually to have an identity bridge that can get us from where we are today to where we want to go, or create a intermediary story between, for example, if you're a multi-six-figure entrepreneur wanting to cross that seven-figure mark, it's not just enough to say, I have an identity as a seven-figure entrepreneur. Your brain might be screaming, well, that's not the evidence. Like, that's not what my bank account says. That's not where my client pipeline is today. But a bridge identity might be something like, I'm crossing into the seven figures and I'm a super delegator. That actually might be a bridge identity as an example that gives us the tactical framework to know what do we need to do to close that gap to get from where we are today to where we're ultimately trying to go next in our business.
And how you were beautiful in witnessing his identity gap. Are there things that we can do or how we can solicit this so that we also have that light bulb to create an even better result like you were able to walk through with your client?
One of the fastest and easiest ways to do this in a very tactical way, one thing that I invite my clients to do that anyone listening to this could do, is take out a sheet of paper. And first, you want to start with, what is the 20% of the work you're doing that's leading to the largest results in your business? For me, it might be something around activating my network, being on podcasts, hosting people on my podcast upcoming, like being able to develop deeper relationships and conversations with people would be one example. But we use the 80-20 rule. So 20% of what we're doing is usually leading toward 80 or more percent of our results. Mm-hmm. And that also means that actually taking an inventory of the 80% of things we're still doing that we might need to fire ourselves from is really important to surface and look at. I'm in the process of expanding my team, so I've just done this exercise on myself, which is what I typically do with all the client exercises I give to clients. I do them on myself as well, and I do them again and again to see how growth is really a spiral, right? We get to the next level, and sometimes we actually need to go back to basics. So if we use the 80-20 rule, the 80% of things that I'm currently firing myself from are things that I can make SOPs and delegate around. In other words, I can give better instructions and clear instructions to my team because I realized that an identity I was holding on to, perhaps for too long, one might say is the project manager in my company. And so when I realized in order to get to the next evolution of my growth as a leader and an entrepreneur and a creator, I actually need to fire myself from everything having to do with project management. That now gives me a clear tactical frame to understand. The question I would ask is, what would need to be true for me to never do project management in my company again? And that question, what would need to be true, fill in the blank, what would need to be true? An example of the client I just gave you, what would need to be true for him to not necessarily be the hardest worker in the company, but the smartest worker, the worker with the most leverage, the worker with the most impact? Once we start shifting the words, it unlocks a better question. So the question for me, when I looked at my 80% list of things that I'm doing that take up a lot of time, they do add value, but they add incremental value, not necessarily exponential value to the business. I was able to actually make that list very tactical and practical and understand that some of that was a lag of my old identity. Some of those were identities I used to live in that made the business prosperous up until now, but what got you here won't necessarily get you there. So a quick inventory on your 80-20 list, and then looking at how you can fire yourself lovingly from that 80% that's no longer of your highest and best is a fast way to start looking at some of those lag identities that did get you here, but they won't get you to the exponential growth that's next.
I know more for many people, the biggest question to ask is, what would a person at that next level be doing, deciding, implementing? And I think one of the most profound things, exercises similar to what you're saying, is take an inventory of this. Think, would a 7-figure business, in this example, would a 7-figure business be the one updating the website? Would they be doing the project management work? Or is that the gap that you've got? And you have to future cast. You have to really think about this, and not just think about firing yourself, actually fire yourself. And so when you're shifting debris, how do you step around the debt, the wealth, the prosperity? Because often when we're climbing, fear comes with us. What do you see? How do you experience it? And how can we all learn from how you guide others?
I think fear can come along for the road trip, but one of my rules for myself and what I encourage and invite clients into is fear doesn't get to press the brakes. Fear doesn't get to accelerate, and fear doesn't get to hold the steering wheel. So fear might sit in the back seat, maybe eventually even the trunk, but it's unlikely that we're going to take any kind of new large endeavor that's going to stretch our skills. If we think about the science of change, in order to do something bigger, we're going to need new skills. And so there's definitely that sense of fear. And I would also replace the word with uncertainty. I think as entrepreneurs, we're constantly dealing with a sense of uncertainty, and we sort of learn to stomach it, almost like maybe being on a boat. We're riding that tide, and we're learning how to stabilize ourselves despite the environment around us. One of the ways that we keep ourselves aware of the balance point, if you're on the ocean, is actually looking at the horizon, if you're somebody that tends to get seasick. And so the same principle applies with fear. If we look too much at literally where we are now and the gap of where we're going to, the distance can be overwhelming, and it can create a level of uncertainty that paralyzes us. But if we actually look at the long-term perspective, the goal is that we're actually starting to make decisions as our future self now. I'd love that you use that word around decide. What is that future version of you deciding? So one example would be to actually stretch the goal bigger and farther so that it shakes up your thinking. Dr. Ben Hardy talks about this a lot in the books, The 2X is Easier Than 2X, which is one of my favorite texts to use with clients. And the idea is that if your goal is too small, we actually see almost unlimited pathways to get there. And we can get paralysis by analysis because there's too many options. Mm-hmm. The more we actually make the goal bigger, so for example, if you're a multi-6-figure company, crossing into the 7-figure mark, the low 7 figures, crossing that $1 million mark might be inevitable. But what would actually change your thinking is, what if you actually went from multi-6 figures to over 10 million? The point is not to create a goal that you can't possibly hit, but the point is to change your thinking about the pathways and the decisions that would actually be required to get there. And there's actually fewer possibilities. There's fewer options if you stretch the goal out and make it way bigger. Because to your point, you're not going to be able to update the website and write every line of copy and also service every customer that comes in the door. It would be impossible to duplicate yourself 1,000 times over to serve clients and gain that much revenue. So if we actually make the goal bigger, that will change our thinking. And so when I have a client that feels stuck or they're experiencing that fear and uncertainty, one of the things I guide them back to is, what do you honestly want? And then I prompt them to actually make that request or that desire even bigger, to see what creative pathways that might open up.
I'm curious, in this world of digital where we're asking AI, choose your flavor of the week, to show me a path to 10x instead of 2x, how does our identity come along for the ride or not in a case like this? Because I love the simplicity with fewer pathways when you are jumping exponentially. But sometimes people see this exponential thing because it's fed to them by a language learning model, but identity isn't something that the AI does well. So how are you encountering that?
Two answers. I believe that all of my clients voicing their truth is actually a really critical component. And so when I'm coaching a client, either I'm live on Zoom with them like this, or I'm actually asking them to use Voxer or another voice note application to start stating their desires more clearly. I've learned recently that our voice, our intonation, is as unique as our thumbprint. And when we use our voice to express our truly held desires, we can't hide anymore from it. And a lot of times fear comes up at that level because clients say, gosh, well, if I want something bigger, if I start creating this grander vision, what if I don't hit it? It would be better to shoot small or play small, because then nobody will know if I failed. Nobody will be able to see me shoot for the moon and land among the stars, which I would still consider success. So to your point, I think AI is a great analysis partner. I use AI a lot for compilation. I would say it's a curation and compilation tool. For me, it's not necessarily a change management tool, and it's not always the most effective mirror to show me more of what I truly and authentically want. I think that change still happens best in the container of a relationship or a network of relationships. And so one of the things that's so beautiful, even about how you and I met, is through a relationship that we both care about. And so I believe with the advent of AI and what AI makes possible, which is frankly so much for my business in terms of tactical and analysis tasks, to change an identity is actually a relationship with yourself. And if you're not being honest about who you are and then what you want, I believe desire is kind of a divine compass. It leads us more into what we want more of, what we want to create, what our maybe vocation or calling or pathway truly looks like from that soul level. When we ignore that and we're not deepening our relationship with ourselves and even deepening our relationship with other people on a creative entrepreneurial adventure journey, we're missing something. The language learning model is great for reflection of the past. It's not necessarily the best prediction of the future, in my opinion. And a lot of identity used the word future casting. That's the same word I would use. So I feel like we're very in sync with our language. Identity work is partially future casting and it's partially relationship driven. It's the relationship with yourself and who you're willing to become. And part of that actually is grief. That's kind of the last thing that I would add that's talked about the least, is the grief of who we leave behind when we make these big leaps forward. We're not static. We change. We're organic human beings. And so each level of growth can also bring a level of grief because who we are is not going to stay the same. And there's an invitation in that, but I think that processing all of that, the relationship component, the future casting, and the grief goes outside of the bounds of what a language model can really hold at this time.
One of the most consistent things I do in my business as a mentor who's helping people to scale to that first million is when they say, who am I to dream so big? And I said, let me just get out a mirror and reintroduce you to yourself, to your point about the relationship of you. It's okay to want what you want. And I know I watch it break. I watched it break in a room I facilitated on Tuesday. They're like, I actually want a lot. And I'm scared by the size of the want. And I said, that is indicating that you're leaving behind that other place. And you will leave behind, I don't fit in that place anymore of smallness. And I wish I could do small. I wish I could do it things. And there becomes a choice. And I said, you actually get to have what you want. And you have to shift and I agree with the language piece. It's an evolution to that. It is a choice and it is evidence-based, relationship-based. And so you've worked with people who have successfully shed the skin, have successfully chosen, embraced, and accelerated a tipping point, and everyone has their own tipping point of what big is, what the threshold is. Everyone has a bias culturally and a bias in our own shapes and forms as we evolve. What have you observed that gets us past the plateau and gets us past, oh my God, now that I'm here, maybe it's easier to go back? Because I see that happen, and sabotage is sometimes part of the journey to the destination.
It is indeed. And I typically take a lot of compassion for every past version of ourselves who couldn't have done things differently. That's my stance or invitation to clients. What you're making me think of is how I typically describe identity work is basically 3Ds, which kind of mirrors our 3D reality. The first is desire. And we talked about that a lot. What do you want? Do you want what you want simply because you want it? And learning to want what you want without justification can undo a lot of conditioning, frankly, because a lot of us are told early on what we're allowed to want culturally, based on our family of origin or where we grew up geographically. There's so many factors that tell us what we're allowed to want or how high we're allowed to shoot in life. And so when we start realizing this is all a game, there's really no rules.
It's arbitrary.
In terms of creation, we are creators. And so we are allowed to actually push the boundaries of what we can create in life. And I tend to work with people that want to create really good things in the world. I feel so lucky. And I think you and I probably share that with the people we work with. And what tends to happen is we bump up against what I would call the second D, which is deserving. Once we're clear on what we want, a lot of people have a block. This I've studied across age, gender, geography. I tend to work with people all over, not just the US, but even the world. And we tend to have a block around what we think we're allowed to have. So once we get clear on the desire, occasionally it happens where we're actually feeling unclear of, can we hold that? If we got it, would we still be happy? What might this desire do to separate us from the people we love? Sometimes people shift quite a bit away from their family of origin or their community that they grew up in, based on the thresholds of what we were allowed to want. So the deserving piece is where I go into people. When I'm coaching them, we actually look at their internal values. And the idea is if you're working from the inside out to create this life that you want, this new identity, we can use that as a bridge to help you raise your deserving level, your ability to welcome with open arms the gifts that are coming towards you already. And there's a lot of layers to that, but I would say that the easiest way to explain it is if you're true to yourself from the inside out, you're using intrinsic motivation. You feel pulled toward, motivated internally toward what you're creating versus this extrinsic pushing energy. We all know kind of what it means to hustle or grind. If we've started a business or started any kind of venture that's made money, there's those early years of just taking any client that comes your way, for example. Eventually, a lot of us get to the position where we realize we can choose the type of clients we want. We can choose the type of projects we want. And that's part of the deserving, where you realize that you're no longer working because you need to. You're offering value to the world because you want to. It's a much different position to be in. And then the third D in the process of that identity evolution is deciding. You talked about it a lot. You used the word choice many times in our conversation so far. There's a power to deciding for our future, for our bold vision, for who we want to become. And we get to author that. And those decisions carry weight. And sometimes we shy away from that because they have impact, positive and negative at times. But we do need to decide. Like, we can't sit in indecision. That's usually a symptom of something else going on under the surface. So in our agency, we get to decide. And that's kind of the evolution from desire to raising our healthy deserve level and continuing to. For a lot of people, that's kind of like yoga. You're always going to get more flexible. You could always raise that deserving level. And then making clear decisions as our future self now.
I think there is such a big difference between I'm deciding and decided. And I know that I hear both in this bridge. I'm deciding to aspire. I'm deciding what's possible in evidence beyond my current reality. And when you're making those choices and commitments in your delegation, in your shedding, in your shift of identity, it becomes a real grounded place of certainty. I am that embodiment, and it's beautiful to bear witness to. It's beautiful to transition. And guys, it's going to be wobbly. And so you want to have support in your pocket, in your team, and you want people at every new level, every new aspiration to see you as you are, not with how you see yourself with your rearview mirror. So I'd love for you, Cassie, to share with us what's working for you right now to capture clients who really need what you bring to the table. What's working in your world?
I love the focus of that question, because when we focus on what is already working, we tend to multiply those efforts. So what works really well for me is I have such a rich and wonderful network. Sometimes it's almost scary. Like, I have 67 unread text messages on my phone today.
That makes me hyperventilate.
I also feel that way too. But that's representative of clients. That's representative of people I love, that I'm checking in on, family members. So for me, I've cultivated a very, very rich network. And one of the things that I've realized over time has been a superpower is I catch up with people. I check in on them. I love on them. If something comes to mind and I'm thinking of them, I send them a text message, preferably a voice note. I tend to find that those are the least AI-able way of reaching out to people these days, is either a video or voice note. And so what works for me to get clients is, I guess, two things: shifting my identity to I'm somebody that attracts magnetically the right clients to me. I've done a lot of work around this. I've done a lot of work on myself. I've done a lot of work with clients. If you could change one belief, it's I'm a great activator of clients. Once I decided to embody that identity, I started looking for evidence of where it was true. And then I have such rich relationships and such a deep, rich network. I keep up with them. I'm not looking for the next client. I'm looking to deepen the relationships I already have. And what tends to happen is more clients find me through LinkedIn, and largely through my relationship network that already exists, because I fell in love with the work and I love the journey with clients. And so it becomes a very natural extension to become referable. I feel like when you're doing great work and you love it. And so I very rarely ask for clients. I try to get out of my own way and change the belief structure. And what I'm working on to continue doing is make myself visible. It's harder to attract clients if they don't know who the heck you are. So this year I'm investing more in my visibility efforts, which would look like LinkedIn and YouTube specifically as a starting place. But I've crossed $800,000 of cumulative revenue in my business before I sent a single email to an email list, which I think is a really funny nod of it doesn't have to look any certain way. And all the things you think you need, this great website, this lead magnet, this email list to build your marketing efforts, you really just need to go talk to people and love on them. And the business tends to grow if it's organic and healthy. That's been my experience. And now after 6 years, I'm going to cross the $1 million mark cumulatively in my business this year. I've just for the first time set up an email list. I'm like, oh, that might be a good thing. It might remind people that I've collected and met over the years that I still exist. So now I'm building that visibility engine next.
People always said to me when I first started, don't look for clients, look for people to support, ways to contribute, and problems to solve, and you will always have clients come to you. And I think that's a much better way to build. So Cassie, how do people find you, to connect to you, to learn more about the work you're doing and the awesomeness that you bring to the world?
Thanks, Christine. 2 places, possibilityinvestor.com. You'll get an introduction to identity work. I built a calculator that almost forecasts your identity or futurecasts it like compound interest. If you make these investments in your identity, could you become in the future? I also love to hang out on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me there. I try to share stories and frankly, just love on people the best I can.
All right, guys, go step into her sunbeam. This is Cassie Shea. We are grateful for you having time to spend with us today. Go connect to her, go be part of that, and shift your identity. It's time to have the creators rise and to put good into the world one relationship at a time. Thank you for being our guest. This has been Amplify Your Marketing Message, and we'll see you on our next episode. We'll see you then. That's a wrap on another amazing episode of Amplify Your Marketing Message with me, your host, Christine Campbell Rapin. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss another great episode. And be sure to visit ChristineCampbellRapin.com/podcast to get a free resource on how to master